Hello and welcome to another episode of Relative Pitch. We are so excited to have today with us Stanford Thompson, the Executive Director of Equity Arch. Welcome, Stanford. It's so nice to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So, for our audience, if you don't know Stanford, first of all, where are you at? There's so much that he has done within our field, so much that we have followed as a group here on Relative Pitch, and he's also a Georgia native. Hello, so of course we had to have him on. So, Stanford, it's so great to have you on. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, especially for our audience members who may not have encountered the work you've done yet?
Yes. So, look, Lauren, Anthony, Michael, thanks again for having me. And I've been following the work that you all have been doing through this podcast and the voices that you have brought forward. And I'm really humbled to be a part of this. So, thanks for having me here. I'll try to do this as quickly as possible, but I grew up outside of Atlanta. Both my parents are retired music educators, was around making music from a very, very early age, picked up the trumpet, and with the help of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra's talent development program, was able to study privately with members of the Atlanta Symphony, and eventually make my way to the Curtis Institute of Music, where I got a bachelor's degree in trumpet performance. And then immediately after that, I went to the New England Conservatory for their Sistema Fellows program, where I spent a year learning about nonprofit management, learning about the El Sistema philosophy in Venezuela. Spending some time preparing to launch Play on Philly, which I founded in 2010. I was the executive director for 13 years and developing that organization. Left it with an almost $3 million budget and a staff of 15 and about 400 students. I left last May, so May of 2023, to pursue the development of Equity Arch, which is a national service organization that consists of members who are passionate about helping classical musicians of color advance into professional careers. We start very young, but with a lot of intention and focus towards, even for middle schoolers and high schoolers, how do we help them get placed in some of the most competitive music schools and conservatories in the country? And then from there, how do we keep helping musicians of color kind of navigate the obstacles that have been put in their place, and receive the type of mentorship that they need to be successful. And then in between all that, I've done lots of other projects all over the country and speaking, and always trying to advocate for those musicians that are oftenly and historically left out of the mix. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to spend the rest of my career fighting for those musicians and lifting their voices up. So again, thanks so much for having me on this.
It's truly an honor, because even in that brief introduction, a taste of what you've done, it's already so obvious the impact you've had on the field, and within the communities you've been in. And it's so interesting because, everything, the education aspect of it, I have so many questions. I want to ask about the performance aspect of it, because I know Michael's eyes already lit up when you said trumpet. And then just everything about the community engagement you're doing is so interesting. So, I'd love to first actually start back with, what was it like having two music educators as parents? Like, what was that like?
It was tough. I mean, my dad's real strict. He's a Marine, fought in Vietnam, the whole you know, if you don't practice and do what you're supposed to do, you're gonna be on the ensemble sounding bad, and you're gonna let your other teammates down. And I'm like, Pop, we're not in Vietnam here. It's just a concert. Like, if I miss my entrance, it's not like the whole brass section was ambushed by the enemy. So my mom had completely the other vibe of, and both supportive in their loving ways. But the luxury that I had is that I have 7 siblings. 6 of them are older than me. Many of them, also went into music. I have another brother that went to Curtis, a brother that went to the new school. So I could kind of see how their lives were playing out,
Mhm.
and also get inspired by them. So by the time it got to me, my folks pretty much knew what was going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of support. It's a household that I know a lot of people don't have the privilege to, grow up in. So there was support from day one, regardless if I wanted to be a professional musician or not.
Mm. I love that your parents allowed you and your siblings to chase after your dreams, going, further on, past middle, past high school. Of you got to practice, you got to establish those good, study habits or practice habits so that it truly pays off. And just seeing that your other siblings went on to these big institutions, and then you following in as the little baby of the family. That's like, it's just an amazing thing to see. When you were practicing and gearing up to go to higher academia, were you thinking of I'm going to take on the world as taking over with equity art? Like, was that in your mind, or were you like, I'm just want to play my trumpet and we'll see where it goes? What were your mind at that time?
Oh, I think both of it.
Mm,
I enjoy playing trumpet and all that, and pretty good at it, and consistently ranked number one in the youth ensembles in Atlanta and at Interlochen in the summers, or that type of thing. um but I always enjoyed making community
mm,
around me. So my mom, uh, in addition to doing her undergrad in flute performance, she did a master's in business at IU. She really wanted to go to Stanford University for business school.
yeah.
So by the time she had me, kid number seven, she named me Stanford just because of her ambitions to go into business. So she would tell me all the time, Stan, you're going to be the businessman of the family. And if you tell that to a kid enough, they kind of start to believe it. So
Mhm.
I am walking around with my business cards. I'm trying to make deals. Um, by the time I graduated from high school, I was part of a group that started the Atlanta Trumpet Festival at Emory University. When I was in college, I created my own nonprofit at summer camp in Reading, Pennsylvania. So I was already kind of like always trying to make community, if it was within trumpet players
Mhm.
or within, groups of students that I was meeting right outside of Philly. And that was just kind of in my DNA.
Mm,
So I would just say that I was searching for a while on how to bring these two things together, because I knew that I did not want to spend my whole career playing on the back row of an orchestra. I also had no idea that, like, kind of blending these two passions together would ever grow into anything as big as what Play on Philly or Equity Arc or L System USA or other projects that I've done. So it's interesting where life will take you if you are willing to stay true to yourself and who you are and who you've always been. And then just let that light and that passion, kind of radiate, build relationships, build networks, and then be willing to like roll your sleeves up and get the work done in building community.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the last thing you just said, and it resonated with me because there's so many people that enter the new age of music, because we keep calling it that, and they're like, I'm gonna do this. And then they're so stuck in their path, they have like these blinders, they don't see everything else that they could accomplish or everything else they could like bring into their fold. They're like, I'm gonna play pictures 300 times. And they're just like right here with it. And but then you have the other people that are way too like, I like everything. And you see it unfocused in your career. And I think it takes a mixture of like macro, micro, macro at all times to figure out where you're going to end up, and then just letting it come to you. If you force something too much, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
not going to work.
Yeah. And Michael, I'd add to that is that I'll never forget an old mentor of mine saying, like, Stan, you're trying to do everything right now.
mm,
It's like, just take a
Mm.
moment and think about this. Like I was 22, 23 years old right after school or my undergrad studies. And like, I want to do all this stuff. And he was like, Stan, you got 40 or 50 more years of your professional life ahead of you. It's okay to be focused and to continue kind of down this road. You got to be conscious, though, of the exit ramps that you
Mm.
can take to other destinations and, other places that you can go and be. But again, you gotta be committed to some type of direction if you're ever going to get to those other exits.
Mhm.
And I
I
think a
like
lot
that.
of people get so stuck in like what's happening now that
Mm,
you like fail to realize like we're on these, look, our ages, we got 40, 50 more years ahead of us.
Right.
mm, mm,
And
mm,
it's okay to choose something for the next 2 years and really give it all that you got to see like where that takes you and what options that you have. Because you
Mhm.
could always come back and take again that exit somewhere else. So
Thank you.
that's the way that I look at life.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to take 2 to 5 years at a time,
Mm.
trying to give
mm.
it all I got. If it keeps growing, if I keep waking up like wanting to like stay in the ring longer,
Yeah.
then I stay in the ring.
Yes.
And look, after 13 years of running play on Philly, like it was time to go find another ring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let the organization just go through its transition,
Mhm.
um, and hope that I built something that's going to last.
Mm.
Mhm.
Michael, were you going to say something? Because I was about to say something, unless you
I
wanted to
don't
say
know if
something.
I don't know if we're reading on the same one about like, because I know Anthony may have felt this or not, and a lot of educators, like when they feel like they've done something, how hard it is to depart
Mm.
and let the thing keep growing without them. I was wondering like what kind of headspace you were going through last May when you were like, okay, I think it's time for this organization to grow, and I'm going to take this exit ramp to go this way.
Yeah, so I think it was a combination of over the past 5 years, I've been telling myself, like, I want to do all this amazing stuff, helping to uplift kids and helping to get them to their next step, right? And then I'm thinking about, like, okay, wonderful. How can I do all those things through this mechanism of Play on Philly? So here I am talking to my board and my staff, like, hey, I want to add this, I want to add that, I want to do this, I want to do that. And some people like, Stan, well, that kind of takes us away from our mission a little bit. Or, Stan, that just will require a set of resources that I really don't think that we're going to have. Like, how are we going to start buying kids $40,000 violins that need that instrument to be more competitive when literally, we're buying, $500 starter violins, which are pretty decent ones for our youngest kids? Like, how are
Mhm.
we going to justify all that stuff? So it took me a couple of years to realize, like, here I am trying to like take this next big step with an organization that it might not be the best fit for all that to happen.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I even like to encourage people that are thinking about within themselves, I'm working in this organization and I feel like what my ideas and what I can bring to the table is so much more than what this organization can actually do. So that was the first part. The second part happened about a year ago. Yeah, a year and some change. When one of my buddies that was with me from the very beginning of starting Play on Philly said to me, Stan, take a moment and think about this. The kids we started in kindergarten back in 2010 have just graduated from high school,
That's crazy.
and the others are going to graduate in a year. Like, Stan, I think you have done your job here.
Mhm.
Made a promise to those kids. He was like, I don't know if you remember this, but you promised them that first concert, we were going to keep this program in their lives until they graduated from high school. So he's like, I think you can go now, knowing that you have kept this promise and that you have helped build an organization that should be able to, stay afloat.
Yeah.
I'll never forget going to bed that night thinking like I'm at peace here. I do think it is time to move on. I have these other ideas. I've accomplished my work here. And, let me dedicate myself to something to the next couple of years and let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you were able to acknowledge the work that you've done to push the organization. You founded the organization, you pushed the organization forward. You got to see a generation literally of students grow and go on to their next stages of life. But then you also could recognize at the same moment that there were rooms for the organization to grow. And that's, I think that those are two things that it's hard to see at the same time. And but I think when you do see it, obviously like the way you did, you were able to leave and then move on to your next steps while leaving the organization healthy and thriving and moving on to their next steps. And I think that is something that is often missed, especially with the nonprofits, because I mean, I'm sure you can speak on this yourself, but when you do things like that, it's very personal. It's passion pursuits usually whenever nonprofits are started. So the idea of leaving that and letting other people who believe in the mission continue pushing it forward is actually it's easier said than done. And I'm sure that's something that goes usually the wrong way. It's easier to go the wrong way, I think. And I think we often see that. So it's really admirable that you were able to come to that conclusion and to leave, and you're still off doing amazing things. I think that's just really fabulous.
I appreciate that, Lauren. Thank you.
Yeah. And I love how you take your same passion that you had to each one of them as you just kind of progress through life. You're like, hey, this is a chapter, and now I move on, and now I'm going to start something new. I do want to touch on something that you said about one of your mentors saying, slow down, slow down. You're like 22 years old. You got your whole life ahead of you. I know that we've talked about this on this podcast. I often question, do we have the rest of our lives in this field, especially the way music goes? The music field, you might be somewhere and then you might not be somewhere. Did you ever feel any time in your journey of like, no, I think I want to continue my foot on the gas pedal. Like, I think this is my way to go.
Yeah, so I believe in doing the right thing regardless of the forces around me. So yes, I've always believed on keeping my foot on the gas. I have hoped that the people around me either will get out of the way because I'm moving pretty quickly, or they, and also others will like jump on board.
Right.
But I try to evaluate myself to say, because there's been times where I've done some real not great stuff, and not only is there nobody around to hit with this fast moving car, but there's also nobody in the back seat. So I've had to, kind of from time to time, figure out where I'm going to continue to put my energy. But in short, I think that when someone is being honest and true to themselves, that's ultimately what matters most. And then in our field, I believe that it's our generation of ideas that's going to really build and shape the field for the next couple of decades.
Absolutely.
Because the world that we're currently living in has been shaped by those that are essentially retiring now.
Yeah.
Right.
You were so correct.
And it's a different world, but look at a lot of the legacy organizations, look at the music schools, look at the places that y'all have been. And I look at it as the work that I'm doing. I do hope someday that I'm running one of these legacy institutions, or perhaps maybe that someone has given me the resources to develop what's going to be a new model of a legacy institution moving forward. So that's kind of where I'm keeping my sights on, because fundamentally, I believe that we need to rebuild stuff. I don't think it's worth fixing a lot of things. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I mean, the reason, like, for me, that the slowing down and things like that is because of just what you said of it is our generation who is going to rebuild all of the systemic problems that we have in this field. When I hear slow down, and especially said to a musician of color, where kind of our previous generation of musicians of color, our own generation, it's always said to slow down, but our jobs are never solid or solidified for people of color. We are always feeling like, oh, this could be the moment where I'm just released and that's it. And we never get the full satisfaction of sinking into a job, especially in the music field, sinking into it and like, I feel stable right here. So whenever I hear that, it kind of sets that like little thing or something my father would always say of like you said earlier, you got to stick to your guns, stick to who you are, and do something that you love to do, and don't let no one else take you off of your path. And so that's just why that little part just always nags at me. Like I know it's meant well, however, there are other issues to that.
Yeah, yeah, certainly agree.
Yeah, and this is kind of going off of what we talked about in our last episode last week. This idea of having to know who you are and like knowing when to listen to someone's advice and when to not. And you kind of mentioned that of this idea of like the powers that be will be, but like it's up to you whether or not you listen to them. And I mean, we've all or me and Mike, or I'm still in school, Anthony's still in school, and we all have mentors, and we get sometimes conflicting advice of, oh, you got to keep going. Yeah, put foot on the pedal. And then you get why are you in a rush? Why are you in a rush? Maybe you should slow down. And sometimes it's the well-meaning, and other times it's not the well-meaning. And I think we talk a lot about the differentiation because we know a lot of students listen to this podcast too, who are starting off in their careers, and they like to hear these conversations. And so I'm sure you've at this point done your fair share of mentoring with the different students who've gone through your programs. And when they're at those points where they're like, well, I want to do this, but I'm being told this. How do you help them reframe it to where they're really focusing on what they want to do and what their intentions are?
Yeah. So I think that there is a lot to do with listening to them where they are. Think about how much folks didn't listen to us when we were in middle school, high school, we were navigating undergrad or maybe masters. And again, you're in a situation where your job, I guess, as a student is right to listen to the master teachers and these master classes that we're in and everything else, and that we're supposed to do everything the way that they want it to be done. Now, I believe that there is a good amount of validity and kind of learning from that. But at the same time, that tends to happen in environments where we don't end up getting listened to. And I do wish that through my undergrad studies, even my high school studies, that those that were entrusted to teach me would have taken a moment or two to hear my story, where I was coming from, kind of what I hear in my own inner ear, what I'm hoping for my own life and career and all of that. But I will say, I'm glad that I found enough people in my life to listen to me, although it might not have come through an institution or institutional ways. So I would say that, I think that's one of the biggest things of like, how do we listen in ways that we weren't listened to? How do we lead in a way where we listen? How do we look at the environment around us and everything that is changing? So let's look at like all of these orchestras having issues, getting contracts passed, and the amount of just not listening between management and musicians. Think about some of the challenges our conservatories have had. Not to call a really big one out in the Midwest, that are having some issues listening to their students and what they ultimately want. And fundamentally believe, because I think I'm at the beginning of that, the newer generation of wanting to be listened to. And then, apply that to our audiences. How much do we really listen to them, the communities that we serve, the donors that we want to help us with this work? Anyway, so all of this is changing around us, and are we willing to listen? And I think that's just going to be such an important skill to have, while trying to lead, while trying to, be an artist and so forth.
Yeah, what you just said something that reminded me of something that we often say. I know I say it whenever I'm in a heated discussion about education and music education and being a band director and conductor of, I think we forget to ask, why are we here and who are we here for? Because in academia, sometimes we forget that the students that are in front of us, that's the reason for our jobs, is literally for the students. If the students were not here, we would not be employed, especially if you're an educator. And as you said, listening. Our generation, I think, is breaking this of we are finally listening to the students, because we weren't heard. And I definitely see a change. Like the students that are coming through now, they have way more of a what to do versus what not to do. Like I think for our generation, we learned maybe let's not do it that way because we've seen it kind of bad. But this generation that's coming up, I'm seeing that they've had good mentorship and leadership. So they're like, yes, I know how to deal with these certain things. But I feel like that question of who are we here for needs to be asked a lot more, from orchestras to the conservatories to any job like that. Who are we here for? That will answer a lot of questions.
Yeah.
No, I really agree with that because the idea of listening to who is really what matters, because oftentimes organizations are listening to their donors or to specific donors, right? But they're not really listening to potential patrons who are out there who maybe want to come, but who are like, well, I don't feel like they want me there, so I'm not going to be there. And we're seeing that issue happen, or we're seeing in general, come on, like, and the people aren't going back to the concert hall the way they were pre-COVID. That is something we are living with now. We understand that there are also generations of people who have passed and who are at a point where they're not going to go out to a concert at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. So then what? When we can't rely on our past patrons, our donors, what do? It's either you adapt or you die. And I think we're going to be seeing, unfortunately, a lot of passing away of institutions slowly but surely, because they're going to be stuck in what they see as their mission without actually listening and adapting to what's going on around them. And that's why I love organizations that really center the idea of youth, of young, of students, and like education, of getting like new perspectives out there, and anything to do with pathway programs, I'm all about it. So like talent development program, have always been a fan of TDP. Everything you're doing with Play On Philly, like it's just all of that is really what needs to be highlighted and focused on in order to have the future that we all want to see. And I agree with you when you say that I don't think it's going to be the institutions that we see now that are pushing that change. It's going to be a lot of new. It's going to be us. What are we making that's going to be the new legacy institutions, the legacy organizations? Because I don't think it's going to be what we're seeing now. Very, very far in the future.
Yeah. Certainly agree with all that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hmm.
I when we were getting ready for this, I was reading your website, and one of the things that you have on there is a keynote speech that you gave, and it made me chuckle a little bit. It was a episode 2 episodes ago, I think, with Adam outside of Bay Area, where the question at the Fluke conference was like, or how far do you think we've come in a past, however many years? And I read, like, I think it was like the first or second sentence. It says that the musician in the professional orchestra that represents Black and Hispanic moved from 1.7% to about 1.8 to 2.5% over a 12-year span. So it's funny when we hear these things because people will often say, oh, things are getting better. That margin, is it technically better? Sure, and from a data standpoint, but is that really doing enough change in these professional orchestras? What were your thoughts when you found out that data?
Yeah, that something is broken and we need to try a different approach. It was that data that started the conversations that eventually led to Equity Arc. And my thing is that we have no shortage of diversity programs across the country from lots of different institutions.
Right.
And as a product of a pathway, a pre-college pathway program, it was wonderful to get that, that support. The problem is the support stopped the moment I graduated and I matriculated into college. Now, one would say, Stan, you went to the Curtis Institute of Music. I mean, very best, really good teachers, no tuition, all of this stuff. But the way the talent development program worked and the way it saw me and the way it helped to build the supports in the community and the village around me is completely different than the workflow and the culture and the environment of a place like Curtis. Now, I would sit here and, kind of say that I think that what's going to help us move this needle is a more collaborative approach where we take the philosophy and the systems and processes of a program like the talent development program, this pre-college pathway program, and we apply that same philosophy and similar supports in different environments as folks are matriculating kind of through this whole system. And because those supports are broken, it all depends upon what level of support you have. So I'll keep using Curtis as an example. Although tuition is free, you have to pay for your living expenses in Philadelphia. And they're expecting for you to live within a 5-block radius of Curtis, which is Rittenhouse Square, which is not cheap. So sure, it's wonderful that the tuition is free, but now I need to think about how I'm going to pay rent in a place that was almost 3 times my parents' mortgage back in Atlanta.
Wow.
And I'm doing that. My brother is there as well. So both of us are there trying to figure this out. And then you add on all the other living expenses, and Curtis is not actually free for some people. Now, other friends of mine, their parents were able to buy them a condo because they can buy a $500,000 condo, sit on it for 4 or 5 years until they graduate and then sell it. So they get all their money back. Maybe they get some more on top of it. But my family didn't have $500,000 to just sit on. So, and then when you think about the context, I'm now in an environment where a lot of people do not understand culturally my background. Now, I was there at a time with, again, my brother was there, Melissa White playing violin, she was there. There was a handful of us that were there that were Black in the school, probably 5 or 6. And again, when we think about what it will take to move this needle, the question is, can we keep these supports? And also thinking about a musician's psychological and mental needs, their emotional needs, of course, their physical needs. We're thinking about the level of training that they need and other types of supports so that everything can stay consistent So at the end of the day, I was doing 20 hours of work study per week. You add that up over all of those semesters and all of that time, I have put in what percentage less than my fellow trumpet player that also came into Curtis, whose family had a situation where he didn't have to do work study. So that amount of time adds up. The stress adds up.
Yeah.
And it all pretty much gets compounded. So those are the things through an organization like Equity Art to say, we need to be much more conscious. We need to think about the barriers that we put in place, the policies and practices that we have that keep musicians of color routinely out of these spaces. And now that I've done this work through Play on Philly, it's not because there's not enough of us at the earlier ages. The problem is that so many of us leave in the high school or college ages.
Yep.
And even think about, like, once you graduate from college, the work you got to do to stay in the game and keep your chops up and get ready for auditions. But when real life is hitting you in the face and you got to pay rent and all that, and it gets real very quick, that's another big factor to say, there's no wonder why many more of us drop off and we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, those are the types of things. And I just said, look, there has to be a different approach. There has to be a different level of collaboration. And instead of like all the colleges saying, oh my, there's Lauren, there's Anthony, like we got to get our hands on them and all of this stuff. Like, how do we start thinking about what we all can do to not only like look at all of us across the country, but also think about like who's in our backyard up and coming. And is it because Juilliard has provided support like the Atlanta Symphony, and that kid in New York ends up in college in California? But what about the kid in Atlanta who's working real hard, who ends up at Juilliard? So if everybody is doing this work with more intentionality and more collaboration, then I think that we can move that needle much, much further than it has been in the past, because everything has been set up with a scarcity mindset. So nobody wants to work together. Nobody wants to recruit the very few number of us. The orchestras are trying to get us to show up to their auditions. We feel like we won't even have a fair shot, so we don't show up.
Yep.
And from what I'm hearing, it's not because, oh, we can't afford to get there, so let's create a program where we pay for plane tickets. No, I think it's just we don't feel like we got a fair shot.
Yep.
So why spend the money and the time?
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional,
Yeah.
like every audition is an emotional transaction. Like, because if you go for an audition, like in my head, like how you're supposed to, you almost like see yourself in that position. It is yours. You just got to go and do it.
Yeah.
And if you get the rug pulled out from under you, that's how much emotional transaction, how much looking inward and judging yourself when it's not even rightfully so judging yourself, do you have to go through to experience it again and again. And at some point you're just like, I'm done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about our boy Josh Jones,
Just about to bring that
issues
up.
that he's having.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. It's like, I mean, Josh is such a fantastic percussionist and human being and musician and everything. And there's this part of me of like, dude, you gonna get a big job. Like, and you'll be able to take that hurt and disappointment and the last laugh all the way to the bank of like everything. And I know that he has a bright future ahead of him, and I hope that he can just continue to push on through the BS that he's had to put up with. And I like that type of stuff just really breaks my heart of why the Kansas City Symphony just could not figure this out. So anyway, I digress a little bit there, but
well, I mean, to what you were saying of feeling like you're not going to be welcomed, even if you do end up landing the job, that second guessing of, at any moment I will be let go, or what I'm sitting into this orchestra, or I'm doing this gig, and as you said, Eric Curtis, there no one knows culturally what where I'm from. So it becomes kind of meaningless after so many days, so many rehearsals, so many weeks. You start to question, why really am I here? Am I being valued as a musician, as a person? What am I doing here? And I don't think that we do a great job with, especially when we get into the profession, of doing like a checkup. Like, are you okay? Like, is everything okay? And I think with your projects and organizations, I'm so glad, because we always talk about a surrounding. You have to surround yourself with positive things and positive people. So I'm so thankful for your organization of keeping these upcoming musicians still in it. Like, we are your support system. You might not have had a support system before this, but we are here for you. And I think that matters the most. Having that support underneath, you can literally fly and do whatever you need to. So I'm just so thankful for your organizations of doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say real quick. I mean, look, I'm excited about this. Musicians of color need to keep practicing, working hard. But at the same time, these organizations have to remove these barriers out of their way. And I think that if we can get that done, we're going to build more trust among populations of color in classical music. And I think that's going to help us get the numbers where we need to, of those that are trying to knock down the doors of music schools, and they're trying to get into summer festivals and, really move on, with their lives in classical music. And I want to be sure to, I know we talked about the orchestra, but there's so many rewarding ways for musicians of color to express themselves. I think about my boy Xavier Foley, who also went through the talent development program with me. Wonderful bassist. And, he has very little desire to be in an orchestra. He's got the chops to be there for sure, but he wants his musical voice heard through his compositions, through his solo work, his chamber work. And, I'm all happy for the professional stage that he's been able to reach. And I just think that there are ways to get more classical musicians of color onto professional stages that they define where they want to be. If it's in an orchestra, if it's in opera, if it's on stage as a soloist, as a composer, a chamber musician, an early music, a musician, whatever it ends up being, the whole purpose of Equity Art is to help them reach their professional stage and be able to make a sustainable living doing that.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're so excited to see what the future has in store for not only you as an individual, but also for Equity Art, for Play on Philly, and all the other amazing organizations that you've been a part of, pushing forward. And we're just, again, so humbled and honored to have had you on with us. And these conversations are never over, and we'll make sure to have all the links down below for y'all to check out, and make sure you can connect and stay connected with Stanford and all of his amazing organizations he's been a part of. Stanford, thank you so much for being with us today. It's truly been an honor. Is there anything else you can leave us with as a motivational a push into the rest of the week?
My only thing is, so what's this thing about relative pitch versus perfect pitch? What's going on here?
Oh yeah.
Why are we not trying to get? Oh, okay.
No. Perfection. We don't do perfection. We like to be relative, right? Because relative is all about listening. It's all about engaging with what's around. And so that's kind of the idea behind it, which is exactly your philosophy. Everything about it is not this idea of perfection, of what we see as perfection, but it's about, well, what can I do with what's around me, who's around me, and who I am. So in a way, I think we're aligned.
Okay. No, I just wanted to ask that question. Sorry to put a little spin on my question, but Look, I love what y'all are doing. Thank you for bringing these voices forward and myself. I wish you all the very, very best. Let me know what I can do to ever help assist any of you in your journey. And of course, for those listening as well. So, engage, be in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank
Beautiful.
you so much to our audience again for tuning into this. What an amazing episode, inspiring. So we hope you enjoyed today, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye.